Over the years, I've had lots of requests for a top 10 films video, top 10 favourite films of mine, or maybe a top 10 of a particular genre. And I've never really done one before, so I figured I'd just do that today. I was thinking about it the other day, and I wanted to do a top 10 horror movies list. And as I started writing the list, and I completed the sort of what I considered to be off the top of my head, the top 10, I thought, how could I not include this film on the list? How could I not include that film? That one is a landmark. It's got to be in there. So I ended up expanding it to my 25 favourite horror films of all time. If you asked me on different days, maybe I'd change the order of these films because I have actually put them in a ranked sequence, which is something I didn't want to do, but I don't know, for some reason I thought it would make the video more interesting to do it that way. And I suppose you could change the order of the list based on different criteria. I mean, if you were to go to for which films are I consider to be the scariest horror films of all time, then my list would be quite different to what it is, because there are some horror films that I consider to be very scary, but I don't actually like them as horror films. I don't find them particularly entertaining or intelligent, but I still find them creepy as hell. And then there are other horror films that have got brilliant concepts but terrible acting and terrible special effects. There are all kinds of criteria that can knock certain movies up or down this list. So in the end, what I decided to do was I decided that I needed to have a particular criteria that I could use to reliably put these films in a certain order. And the criteria that I ended up using was basically, if I was only allowed to have 25 horror films in my movie collection and I wasn't allowed to have any other horror movies, which 25 would I have? Okay, so I'm going to read all these films off in reverse ranking order from 25 down to 1. And I'm going to talk a little bit about each film rather than just list them. I'm going to talk about why each film made the list. But before I start that, let me just say that this isn't a list of what are the best horror movies of all time. They're just my personal choices. I mean, there's not going to be anybody who watches this video who's going to agree with my 25 choices or is going to have them ranked in the same order if they did. Okay, so first on the list is at number 25 is David Cronenberg's Videodrome. Now, I love Videodrome because of just the absolute insanity of the film. There's so much crazy surrealism, and it's got all the David Cronenberg body horror stuff, but it's also very intelligent. It's although it's not an easy film to figure out in its details, I think most people who watch it get the idea that that movie is about how the VHS video media, when it came about in the late 70s and early 80s, how home video media was influencing people's mindsets and the sudden access to having certain types of movies and violent content available at home on VHS video that could be watched over and over again, that could influence people's mindsets. It's a little interesting piece of history that doesn't really get talked about, the transition between when people were only able to see certain types of violent movies on a cinema, or those movies might be shown on terrestrial TV, broadcasted. So you had to actually mark it in your diary that you were going to sit and watch this movie when it was broadcasted, and then when the movie would be shown on TV, it would usually be edited and to remove certain violent things. And then VHS video comes along, and some people can go out to the video rental store, rent an incredibly violent movie, and see it in a much more violent form than would be shown on terrestrial TV, and they can watch it whenever they wanted and watch it as many times as they like. And Videodrome is one of the few movies that I've ever seen that explores that particular change in society that went on at the time. I mean, I've talked a little bit about this before in my Michael Jackson Thriller analysis video. The fact that there was such a change that went on in the viewing habits of children around that time, because kids weren't able to see horror movies, because if they were on TV, they were on late at night, and then suddenly VHS videos meant the kids were able to watch really hardcore horror movies in the daytime, and a hell of a lot of parents didn't really have much of a concept of how to deal with that, and a lot of parents let their kids watch really violent horror movies, disturbing horror movies at quite a young age, and so a whole generation of kids were having a lot of nightmares, and I was one of them. I saw The Shining and Alien when I was 7 years old. I think I saw The Exorcist when I was about 9, and these films were very powerful and kind of educational, but also that VHS market, it was a whole questionable portion of history there. So yeah, Videodrome explores that kind of thing, and it's just the imagination that goes into the surrealistic content of the movie, and the special effects are very, very good practical effects for the time as well. So yeah, Videodrome is number 25. It would have made it higher up the list if the basic narrative and meanings of the film had been a little bit easier to decipher. At number 24, I've picked The Incredible Shrinking Man, the old black and white movie, which I think was made around 1965 or something like that. I think it was 1960s. This is a bit of a strange choice, really, because the first half of the movie isn't horror. It's science fiction. But as you get halfway through the movie, for those of you who haven't seen it, the lead character, he keeps shrinking smaller and smaller and smaller. It's all brought on by radiation. Typical 1950s, 60s radiation causes changes that mutate people, that kind of thing. And he ends up so small that he gets lost in the basement of his own house, and there's a tarantula living in the basement, and he spends the last half of the movie trying not to get eaten by this tarantula. And trying to survive, trying to find food, and then he has to compete with the tarantula for food and so on. But what's really good about that portion of the movie is that the tarantula itself certainly represents all of his fears. If you go read the novel of The Incredible Shrinking Man, which is a fantastic book, I highly recommend it. The spider is very clearly a representation of everything that he fears about the dangers of the world around him as he shrinks smaller and smaller. And what works so well in the movie is that, because they didn't have CGI back then, they had to use practical effects, and they basically had to, use real footage of a live tarantula and combine it with footage of the actor and, blend the two together. And it works really, really well, and the music's quite creepy. So, you got this guy running away, and this tarantula's chasing him. He hides inside the matchbox, and then the tarantula is crawling over the matchbox trying to get inside and eat him, but it's too big, it can't get in, and so on. The second half of the movie is really good, and surprisingly philosophical as well, the film is. It's got an ending that is both happy and sad at the same time, depending on your point of view. In fact, Incredible Shrinking Man is absolutely ripe for a modern day remake, because what could be done with CGI today to make the guys him shrinking and the environments around him, God, they could do so much with that. So yeah, Incredible Shrinking Man is number 24 on my list. Number 23 is a not very well known horror movie called The Legend of Hell House. I believe this was 1970s it was made. I've seen it about 3 times, and it's kind of a variation on the old horror movie The Haunting. A bunch of people get together in a house. There's been rumours for years about there being supernatural occurrences in this house, and some scientific investigators are going to go into this house and try and take readings and figure out what's going on. And although The Haunting itself hasn't made my list, because I know a lot of people really highly rate it, but for some reason that film's never really quite done it for me. It's decent, but I haven't put it on my list. I consider The Legend of Hell House to be a better film. It's very well directed, it's quite creepy, the cast is good. There's a really, really dark undertone to the whole movie. I don't want to say too much more about it, really. And also, I can't remember a hell of a lot of the plot. I just remember that the whole film, from beginning to end, had this really creepy, dark atmosphere. And it managed to avoid some of the silliness that's usually associated with supernatural horror films. It does a good job. Number 22 on my list is Takeshi Miike's film Audition. This is a Japanese horror film, and well, I suppose you could call it a horror film. Actually, there's a point that I have to make here. Some of the films on my list, you could call them serial killer thrillers, but I actually consider serial killer thriller movies to be a modern day incarnation of horror, because everybody's so much more aware of science and stuff these days, and religion is taking a back seat in the world. People don't really believe in monsters as much as they used to. Most people don't believe as much in ghosts. They certainly don't believe in vampires, werewolves, and so on. And so serial killers have become the new monsters in cinema. So to that effect, there are certain serial killer thriller movies that I've included on this list as horror. And yeah, I mean, it's, Audition is, it's certainly got horror film elements. It's very violent. It's gory. It's very subliminal. Something amazing about that movie is it was shot in just 1 week. I mean, Takeshi Miike and his team are just brilliant at throwing these movies together really fast, but still having a high quality to them. Yeah, Audition's pretty powerful. And yeah, it's not just a exploitational, violent, sadistic horror. It is very sadistic to the point where some could call it torture porn. But there is a point to the movie as well, which I'm sure you'll figure that out if you go and watch it. So yeah, Audition is number 22 on my list. Number 21 is Salem's Lot, which is the three-hour made-for-TV adaptation of Stephen King's vampire novel of the same name, Salem's Lot. Salem's Lot possibly could have gone further up the list, except for the fact that it's 3 hours long. I mean, I suppose the 3 hours doesn't really drag too much, because a lot of the subplots in the film are quite interesting anyway. There's a lot of good humour in there. There's some really good dark moments. I think it's just one of two movies that I've got on my list that were originally made for TV but ended up being, much more well received. So yeah, Salem's Lot is very good. Excellent music in the film. Something that lets it down slightly for me, and which is very often a problem with vampire movies, is the makeup effects seem a little bit... They're good in places, but they're also kind of cheesy. When you get we've got a vampire, let's just slap some white powder on the face and redden the lips a little bit and, stick a pair of false fangs in. There's always been a difficulty with doing vampire makeup in movies in a way that is actually effective. Too easy for filmmakers to fall back on the traditional tropes in that respect. So for that reason, Salem's Lot was knocked slightly down the list. Oh, by the way, Salem's Lot was directed by Tobe Hooper, and he also did Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which, although I think is an extremely good horror film, it just about missed making it onto this list. It probably would have been number 26 or 27 on my list. The reason it didn't make it on here is because I find the film technically up and down. In some places it's really well shot and well edited, and in other places it looks and sounds kind of amateur. It's also a very chaotic film. I mean, I think it's quite intelligent. I've done a video on Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is here on YouTube, which is called Animal Rights Themes in Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So if you're not aware of that aspect of the film, go and give that a watch. But at the end of the day, Texas Chainsaw Massacre is not a movie that I particularly enjoy watching. It's not necessarily because of the violence, it's more because of the technical ups and downs of the movie. So yeah, it didn't quite make the list, but Salem's Lot I think is a more polished film than Texas Chainsaw Massacre, so that one did make the list. Next movie on my list is, it's another made-for-TV movie, which was so good that, I'm not sure if it actually ended up getting a cinema release because it was so good, I can't remember. But the movie is called Murder by Decree, and this is a 1970s horror film, and it's a very unusual concept, this. If somebody just mentions this concept, you probably think, oh, it wouldn't work, but it really does work well. The idea is that they took the Jack the Ripper case and they combined it with Sherlock Holmes. So they took the fictional character of Sherlock Holmes and had him chasing Jack the Ripper in London. Genius stroke, it's... Who'd have ever thought to do that? Just combine a real case with a fictional detective. And it's fantastic. Murder by Decree is Very, very well made film, very well acted. And Murder by Decree is one of the creepiest films I've ever seen. It's definitely in my top 10 for scariest films. And it's not even traditional scares. It's not jump scares. It's not gore. It's not horrible makeup. The creepiness of Murder by Decree comes from the set designs and the camera work and the music. The particularly creepy are the handheld shots moving through foggy back streets of London where these prostitutes are being killed by Jack the Ripper. And a lot of the shots are done from the viewpoint of the killer. Not all of them, but some of them are. Those scenes are just incredibly powerful. I can't even do it justice. Watch the film and you'll find out. A little sort of interesting bit of trivia on that as well. When I was doing my video years ago about the set design continuity in Kubrick's The Shining, in which Kubrick used deliberately impossible spatial orientations of the sets to confuse the viewer so that they felt like they were lost in an overlook hotel maze that had no exits. When I was researching that and I went to the Kubrick archives in London, I was looking at the blueprints of the Shining Overlook Hotel, the constructed indoor sets, and these were blueprints that had been housed in Kubrick's own personal research warehouse at his property. They'd been housed there for years. And weirdly, amongst those blueprints was the blueprints for the sets for Murder by Decree. Murder by Decree was filmed in the same studio as The Shining's interior sets, Pinewood, I think it was. And somehow the blueprints for the Jack the Ripper story of Murder by Decree ended up being taken away and added to Kubrick's archives and mixed in with the blueprints of the Overlook Hotel. And still to this day, I wonder how much of that was an accident. Looking at the chronology of when the film was made, I think that Murder by Decree was shot in Pinewood Studios just before The Shining was, and so the blueprints for the sets must have just been left lying around. And then Stanley Kubrick must have got hold of them and said, well, I'll add them to my archives. But why would he do that? Why would he mix the blueprints of the Overlook Hotel and the sets of Murder by Decree, which is a Jack the Ripper story? Well, you've got Jack Torrance in The Shining, and he's turns out to be an axe-wielding maniac murderer. I don't know. I wonder whether that was an accident or not, or whether Kubrick was just throwing that in there as some sort of statement about Jack Torrance being an equivalent of Jack the Ripper. And actually, that is given a little bit of credence by the fact that Jack's scrapbook in The Shining, if you go and look at that scrapbook in the archives in London, there's tons of old newspaper articles about the gold standard and so on, and World War One and Two. But there's also a lot of stories in there about serial murders that happened at the time, both in America and Britain. So yeah, that's an interesting little piece of trivia about the blueprints there. Number 19 on my list is George Romero's Night of the Living Dead. Now, some people would probably say, oh, hold on, wait, you should put Dawn of the Dead on your list. I do like Dawn of the Dead. It's a lot of fun, it's very inventive. But the reason I like Night of the Living Dead better than Dawn of the Dead is because I brought up the issue of makeup earlier on. A lot of vampire films have makeup that looks kind of cheesy, looks like Halloween makeup. You got the same problem with a lot of the makeup in Dawn of the Dead. For me, the skin of the zombies looks a bit too blue, and it makes them kind of look slightly cartoonish and unreal. At the same time, Tom Savini does some great gore effects in the film, but it was just the average zombie that's walking around in that film. To me, they tended to look a bit cheesy. And I also thought the film could have been a little bit tighter on the edit. It seemed a little bit scrambled in places, but Night of the Living Dead, because it's black and white, that kind of offsets the bad coloration of the makeup that is present in Dawn of the Dead. And also, Night of the Living Dead, when it came out, was a real milestone because it took cinematic horror gore to a level that hadn't really been seen much before that. It was a lot more violent and visceral than a lot of films that had gone before. Um, it was also unusual for the fact that it had a black guy in the lead role, and also for the fact that the lead hero dies at the end, in the most unflattering way. So yeah, Night of the Living Dead is excellent. Number 18, and this might be a controversial one with you guys because the critics don't like this film very much at all, and that is Amityville 2 The Possession. It's the only one of the Amityville films that I highly rate, and this film got a lot of flack when it came out because it had the controversial subplot of the teenage boy of the story, late teenage boy, engages in incest with his sister. And it's because he's possessed. This demon has taken over him and it makes him do dodgy things that he normally wouldn't do. But at the same time, the film implies early in the story that there is an attraction between him and his sister even before any supernatural stuff takes place. So that was an aspect of the film that I think the critics really jumped on and didn't like. There's also another problem with the movie, which if I remember rightly, the critics didn't like this much either. The film, it's got a spree killer theme with it. There's been an issue over the years where every now and then you get some kid in America, some teenage kid who seems to have a normal upbringing, middle class upbringing with a seemingly happy, healthy family, and then suddenly that kid goes nuts, takes a gun, kills the whole family, and then sometimes they kill themselves. That happens every now and then. And it always confuses people why that. What the hell? How can a kid raised in such a nice way in a privileged background suddenly go haywire and kill all his family? And Amityville 2 is one of the only movies I've ever seen that explores that particular subject matter, and it does it through the narrative drive of spiritual possession. Yet at the same time, the film can just be watched on that level. You can ignore the supernatural stuff and explore the movie in terms of the hidden family problems that can drive a teenager to go and kill their own family when the rest of the world looks in from outside and thinks the family is all normal. Personally, that's one of my favourite aspects of the film. But again, it's an uncomfortable subject, so I think the critics didn't like that. Amityville 2 is also quite a technically good film. Some of the acting, not all of the acting, some of the acting in the film is very, very good. Some of the cinematography is excellent. There's some really bizarre camera moves that I've not seen in other movies. Also, I'd say that some of the makeup in this film is quite above par compared to other movies. It's a funny one, this. I mean, I think a lot of people thought that Amityville 2 was trying to imitate The Exorcist. And I suppose you can say that on certain levels. But I think, whereas The Exorcist gets quite crude in its sexuality at times, Amityville 2 explores that sexual aspect of spiritual possession in a much more underhanded and subtle way with the brother sleeping with his sister. And it doesn't go into crude detail about it and have a lot of swearing and stuff like that. So in that respect, I consider it to be a little bit more mature than The Exorcist as a horror film. There's a hell of a lot more I could say about Amityville 2. It's very underrated. Number 17 on my list is Rosemary's Baby. Yeah, I know Roman Polanski's got this horrible history with the abuse of the teenage girl and stuff like that. Okay, I'm not thinking about that stuff. I'm just thinking about Rosemary's Baby as being a very good film, because it's not always the case that a person who creates a great piece of art is necessarily a great person in general. People can be very nasty and yet still be very good artists, in all fields. So Rosemary's Baby is really good. One of the things I love about this film is the sense of normality it creates in the first half of the movie. You got this couple who've just moved into this apartment. They have little sort of bits of banter between themselves and the neighbours, and it all feels very much like a real home environment, an apartment in the city. The film really goes for it in terms of creating a believable atmosphere, and it very slowly introduces the supernatural stuff. It's a really good way to engage the audience, connect them with something that feels totally real, and then gradually put that supernatural stuff in. A lot of the best horror movies do that, by the way, but Rosemary's Baby is particularly good in that respect. Okay, so next on my list is number 16, is an 80s horror film called Fright Night. Um, Fright Night's a funny one, you know, it's a vampire film. And in a way, Fright Night sort of cobbles together a lot of the classic elements of vampire films. It doesn't break a lot of new ground. It covers all the traditional tropes of vampire horror, but it does them so well. You know, the lead actor, I've forgotten his name, was it Chris Sarandon? I think it was Chris Sarandon, I can't remember his name, but the guy who plays the lead vampire in it is excellent. And he brings a sort of sexuality to the vampire role that really suits it. You know, I mean, a lot of the old vampire films, the sexuality is kind of played down because the actors who play the vampires aren't really sexy enough. I mean, you used to have Christopher Lee, who definitely had a screen presence, but he was a bit too old to convey that sexual vibrance. Whereas the actor who plays the vampire in this film, he oozes sexuality. Fright Night is very good. It's technically very well made. It's well edited. It's well paced. Cinematography is really, really good. There's some real standout classic scenes, like there's he's dancing with a girl who he's trying to seduce in a nightclub, and she's spinning around, her head spinning with the music. She's hypnotized, and she sees in the mirror that she's dancing on her own. Great sequence. There's also some excellent special effects in it. The young boy in the film who gets turned into a vampire or a werewolf, I've never been able to figure out which he is intended to be. I always thought he was a vampire, but then I read other people said no, he's actually a werewolf. There's a transformation sequence from him. It's actually a reverse transformation sequence where he turns from a wolf or a werewolf back into a human as he's dying. Incredible sequence, great special effects, emotionally powerful. And there's a lot of humour throughout the Fright Night film, but every now and then the humour gets dropped while a much more serious scene is shown. And that reverse transformation sequence of a dying werewolf, one of my favourite horror movie moments. So yeah, Fright Night is great. Okay, so what have we got next on the list here? At number 15 is the 1978 remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. This one is very underrated, doesn't get talked about enough. Fantastic cast, really good acting. You know, you've got Donald Sutherland, you've got Leonard Nimoy. You remember Spock from Star Trek playing a psychiatrist. He's perfect for that role. He's got a great little role in the movie. Invasion of the Body Snatchers is very good. You know, fantastic special effects. The original Invasion of the Body Snatchers was, basically an allegory of communism. But the remake sort of veers away from the communism thing. It's getting at something. There is a political element to the movie, but it's a lot more vague and it's more related to the modern world. That's all I'll say on that front. But yeah, Invasion of the Body Snatchers is excellent. It's got a real hardcore sense of paranoia. It's very well shot. Great special effects, great acting, some really good dialogue, and some good underhanded humour in places as well. I highly recommend that film if you haven't seen it. Number 14 on my list is David Cronenberg's The Fly. Sci-fi horror. But, the film is so gory, I think you'd have to class it as a horror anyway, and because of the downbeat bad ending. The Fly is excellent. I mean, it's not a traditional horror in the sense of there's a monster trying to kill everyone, because the lead character is the monster. I suppose if there is a monster in this film, it would have to be nature itself. The gene pool, the craziness of the gene pool, and how things can go wrong with genetics, whether it's through science or nature itself can do some crazy things with genetics at times that are actually quite horrific. The Fly is technically fantastic. Great cinematography, great sound and music, editing, lighting, and so on. It would have been so easy for The Fly to be a stupid movie because some of the things that have to be shown on screen would have been so easy to do them wrong, but really, really good prosthetic effects and lighting and good direction and good acting. You know, Jeff Goldblum was fantastic. And Goldblum has to do all this acting with an unbearable amount of horrible makeup on him. It must have been an awkward role to play, but his acting combined with the really good makeup and special effects carries this film through. The Fly is excellent. Number 13 on my list is Twilight Zone the movie. And kind of ironic that I've put it as number 13 because there was a lot of bad luck involved in the creation of that movie. You know, a couple of actors were killed on set by accident. And that led to there being a bit of a critical attack on the film, which damaged its reputation a great deal. There's also the issue that Twilight Zone the movie is an anthology of 4 short stories with varying quality. The first story is the one where the major disaster happened, and that's set in Nazi Germany. It's sort of you could call it a horror story, but it's not fantastic, even though it's directed by John Landis, who's a great horror director. That particular story isn't amazing. It's just okay. The second story is not even horror at all. It's just supernatural fantasy directed by Spielberg. But where this film excels as a horror movie is in the third and fourth short stories of the movie. I mean, the last 2 stories more than make up for the lower quality of the first 2 stories in the movie. And also, the third and fourth stories in this film are directed by other directors who had much lower status in the industry than Spielberg and Landis did, and yet they were the ones who delivered the fantastic episodes, partially because the scripts were better in the third and fourth episodes anyway. So you got the story of the kid who's got like a magical ability to do anything and is keeping a bunch of adults prisoner in his house. That is just amazing. I've got a 1 hour analysis of that particular episode, which is called The Good Life. It's a 1 hour analysis of what is essentially a 20-25 minute short story, because there's so much going on in it. On all levels, it is fantastic, and it could have easily been expanded into a full feature film. At the time of me posting this video, that 1 hour analysis of Twilight Zone the movie, third episode, is available on YouTube, free to watch, so go and check it out. It's so underrated. And then the fourth episode, which is most people's favourite, it's my second favourite, most people love it, is the John Lithgow episode where, you know, he's a guy who's got a fear of flying. He's on a plane and he starts seeing a monster that's on the wing of the plane tearing the engines apart, and he thinks it's real. Other people say he's hallucinating and losing the plot. And fantastic episode, technically brilliant on all levels, superbly paced, and John Lithgow, career-defining performance in that episode. So yeah, Twilight Zone the movie is extremely underrated. If you haven't seen it, go check it out, and don't let the first 2 episodes of the film put you off. The third and fourth ones are worth sitting and waiting for. Number 12 on my list is another anthology horror film of short stories, and this one is Creepshow, and it came out the same year as Twilight Zone the movie, which is 1982. And I was kind of umming and ahhing about which of these films should be above the other in the ranking. And I went for Creepshow because it's got 5 short stories, and the first 2 are okay. They're kind of laughable, to be honest, the first 2. But the third, fourth, and fifth episodes, all 3 are fantastic. You know, the third one, you got Leslie Nielsen playing a crazy serial killer. And there's a lot of comedy in that particular episode, but it's also got some excellent makeup effects, very atmospheric. The fourth episode is gory as hell, about a school janitor finds a crate that's been locked for decades under a stairwell in a university, and he calls up one of the professors and they open it. It turns out there's this prehistoric monkey creature that's hiding in the crate, and it starts slaughtering people, and the gore is just so over the top, but it works really well. It's the gore effects are extremely good, but the film also offsets the horrificness of the gore by combining cartoon graphics with the moments of gore and cartoonish lighting. Now that may sound stupid, but you watch the film, the way it's done is fantastic, and I've not seen any other movie that's pulled that off like that. And then the fifth episode of the film, I forgot, what was the actor's name? I can't remember the actor's name. He's a really good, well-known actor, but he's an old guy, and he plays this super rich guy who lives in this penthouse apartment, and he seals himself off from the world because he considers other people to be the equivalent of cockroaches. He hates people, and he spends all his time sitting there playing with stocks and shares and firing people and ruining people's lives and so on. And so throughout the episode, actual cockroaches, start invading his household and taking over. And there's no CGI. You couldn't do that film with CGI and have it work because it would just look too fake. But they used thousands and thousands of real cockroaches on set to get these horrifically creepy shots. It's unbelievable. When you watch that episode, you just can't believe that they bothered to even try and film this. There must have been cockroaches running inside the cameras and people's costumes and everything. Nightmare shoot, and yet so technically well done as well. So Creepshow is superb, fantastic editing, fantastic lighting. The cast throughout, I mean, there's some real good actors of the time. You've got Ted Danson is in there. So many well-known actors from the time took part in the Creepshow film. And of course, it's written by Stephen King. It wasn't a novel. It was scripted. Stephen King just wrote it straight up as a movie script. And, I'm sort of up and down on whether I like Stephen King at various points in his career. I like some of his early novels. Some of his novels I think are overrated. I think a lot of his stuff is dragged out. But the script that he did for Creepshow, for me, is one of the greatest pieces of writing that he ever did. Number 12 on my list is Hellraiser from 1987. Clive Barker's very first film, and what an amazing job he does for a first-time director. The film is based on his short novel and it was expanded into a pretty decent movie script. Whole film is full of symbolic stuff. It's way too intelligent for a first-time director. I've done a 45-minute study on Hellraiser, which is available on my site as a digital download. It's so good. I mean, the main sort of thing about the movies, it delves into the seedy underworld of masochism and sadomasochism and all that, which is an aspect of society that doesn't get talked about a lot, or it doesn't get researched very much either. It's a funny aspect of society that we don't really know how much of this stuff goes on. For all we know, our neighbours could be dressing up in bondage and whipping each other. We just don't know. And we know it definitely goes on because there's a whole industry of people who buy all these fucking dildos and whips and chains and handcuffs and all this weird stuff. And yet they live ordinary lives on the outside as if they're just regular people. What percentage of people are into that stuff? We just don't know. Would they even admit it if we tried to do some research on it? So Hellraiser gets into that aspect of human psychology, the hidden dark sexuality, and it does it by taking it to an absolute extreme of gore. The certain characters in the movie are seeking out the ultimate thrill, and the thrills that they end up seeking out, it leads them basically to hell, to a place where they get mutilated and pulled apart and then put back together and then mutilated and pulled apart again for all eternity. Absolute nightmare scenario. The costumes of the demonic villains, the Cenobites, certainly portrays all of that BDSM stuff. Hellraiser's really, really good. But because it's so gory and has comedy elements, it's easy to overlook how intelligent that film is. Okay, folks, time for a commercial break here. For those of you who are not aware, over at my website, which is collativelearning.com, I've got a ton of videos and articles and audio files on film analysis and psychology and so on, which are available for digital download. And these are items that are mostly not available for free on YouTube or any other platform. And the items which are available to order are available on the film analysis page and here, which is the insight page. And that page, I'll just take you quickly to that. That page contains videos and articles and some audio files on psychology. There's a ton of psychology stuff there. There's stuff on video games. There's a couple of items on art, such as the H.R. Giger artwork. There's a huge study of his work on there. So say you wanted to make some orders and you were interested in the HR Giga one, you click view product and you have a little read up, you check out the price, and if you like it, you say I want this, and the item jumps up in there into the corner, and you can stack items up there in the corner. Let's say you went back to my previous page and you went to the film analysis page, and say you wanted The Abyss. You click I want this, and you can see that the items are stacking up there in the corner. Let's see, there's Full Metal Jacket, tons of Kubrick stuff here. A huge study on Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior. Nightmare on Elm Street, 2.5 hour analysis. Predator, 2 hour, 20 minute analysis. Stuff on Pulp Fiction, RoboCop, Risky Business, Saving Private Ryan, Scarface. Lots of stuff on The Shining, Silence of the Lambs, Starship Troopers. Tons of stuff here for you to sink your teeth into. So if you're ever bored with waiting around for me to post new content, because sometimes it takes me a few weeks between projects, then just head over to the site and place a few orders. And once you've picked the items that you want and they've stacked up in the corner there, you click pay, and you can select to use your credit card or PayPal. It's all secure. I've been using this selling system for many years now, and there's never been a problem with people's personal data being breached or anything like that. And if there's ever a difficulty with the order, you can contact me very easily. There's a short video explaining how to place the orders and a little bit of a write-up here about it as well. Okay, so if you're interested in that stuff, then head over to my website, which is collativelearning.com. And now back to the video. It's getting a little bit dark outside here, so just had to change the lighting a little bit. Number 10 on my list is The Exorcist. And I should imagine a lot of you will be like, what? Exorcist is only number 10? Why isn't it number 1, 2 or 3? Well, The Exorcist would have been boosted right up into the top 5 because I really like a lot of stuff about The Exorcist. It's very well shot. The sound design is fantastic. There's some great editing. I absolutely love the Iraq sequences at the beginning of the movie. And I've actually done a full film analysis of the Iraq sequences on their own. And that video was here on YouTube at the time of me posting this video. It's on my Rob Ager channel, so you can go and watch it there. And it's called Excavating the Exorcist. So yeah, incredible amount of subtlety in The Exorcist. But for me, what knocks Exorcist slightly down my list is the over-the-top sexuality and vulgarity. I understand that it's there to sort of, convey the demonicness of the Pazuzu demon, the evil. But I don't know, still to this day, some of that stuff comes off as a little bit adolescent for me. And I absolutely love the film up until the actual exorcism ending. There's some very powerful imagery and moments in the ending, but there's also a lot of stuff that I find a little bit silly in the end sequence. So, I mean, it sounds like I'm knocking The Exorcist. I'm not really. I'm just explaining why it hasn't been boosted up beyond the number 10 slot. There's so much other good stuff going on in the movie, some real shock moments. That crucifix masturbation scene, how the hell they managed to get that past the censors and out there. It's one of the most shocking things I've ever seen in a movie. It's weird because that moment is incredibly powerful and works so well for conveying how evil the demon is. And then I think that kind of offsets the other attempts to shock later in the movie, with the vomiting in the face and all that kind of thing. Those things feel kind of silly compared to the crucifix masturbation moment. So if they could have kept up, not necessarily showed things later in the movie that were as bad as that, but kept up the sort of serious tone and not gone for stuff that was laughable, then Exorcist could well have ended up even being in the number 1 slot on my list. But yeah, it's a great movie. I have actually got a couple of videos about The Exorcist here on YouTube. As I already mentioned, I've got the Excavating the Exorcist, which is about the Iraq scenes opening of the film, which hardly gets talked about, but it's brilliant. I've also got a video about the possibility of sexual abuse themes in the film. Go and have a look at that one. I think it's about half an hour long. And I actually had a little bit of feedback a while back. Billy Friedkin, who directed The Exorcist, he actually watched my video on the abuse themes in the film, and he tweeted about it, and said that it was, quote, fascinating. Doesn't necessarily mean he entirely agreed with it, but I'm sure if you've seen with interviews with Billy Friedkin, when Friedkin doesn't like something or he thinks something is stupid, he says it. He doesn't pretend to like things that he doesn't like. So the fact that he watched and found it fascinating, that particular video, I was like, oh, that's great. Happy about that. Okay, so next on my list is number 9 is Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. Again, this is, I was saying about the serial killer thing, sort of verging into horror. Horror doesn't always have to be about supernatural monsters. Sometimes it can be about the monsters that lurk inside the human mind. And Psycho is certainly about that. Still to this day, it's a very good film to watch. It's well paced. It's got some real bizarre twists. It broke so many rules when it came out. Killing the lead character halfway through. The editing and music of the shower murder scene was just revolutionary. Never seen anything like that in a movie before, or really anything since. It's so artistically well done. Still very powerful. In fact, I've got a video here on YouTube, which is a analysis of the Psycho shower scene. Watch that and find out just how subtly brilliant that scene is. I know it's a scene that's got a great reputation, but there's a lot of aspects of it that still don't get talked about by the critics. Go and watch my video on it. You should enjoy it. But also Psycho, I mean, that movie started delving into, sort of deep psychology. It's something that Hitchcock was, probably Hitchcock's greatest contribution to cinema, was the fact that he made movies that delved into deep psychology. Whereas previous movies, monsters was sort of very one-dimensional, and Hitchcock was exploring dark aspects of the human mind that normally movies didn't sort of get into. And Psycho did a great job of that. Number 8 on my list is An American Werewolf in London. This is a very, very underrated movie. It's well known for its fantastic special effects. The werewolf transformation sequence done with practical effects is arguably the greatest monster transformation sequence ever put on film. And it's all shot in full light. I've actually got a video here on YouTube, which is a comparison of the transformation sequences in An American Werewolf in London and The Howling. And The Howling, for me, has got the second best monster transformation sequence ever put on film, or at least in terms of werewolf transformations. So yeah, I've got a video that explores those things in depth. But An American Werewolf in London, the full movie, has got so much more to offer beyond special effects. A lot of the critics panned it because they were confused by the fact that it had a lot of humour in it. How the hell they could get confused over that, I don't understand. Why does a movie have to just be in one genre? It's like saying, oh, Alien or The Thing is a bad movie because it's not pure horror. It's half science fiction. It's a hybrid, therefore we're going to give it a bad review. No, a horror film can also be a comedy and work quite well. There have been quite a few that have done that over the years. But An American Werewolf in London is probably, for me, the greatest in terms of combining horror and comedy. I mean, one of the basic achievements of that film, of its many achievements, something that I don't really hear talked about much, is the fact that it captures British culture of the time so well. That film captures British culture better than British made-for-TV programmes and films of the time. It just nails it. All of the characters they are like the kinds of people who you meet in the British countryside and in London. It really nails it on that respect. So just from a cultural point of view, a cultural exploration point of view, it's a fantastic film just on that level. The humour is all over the place. It's very, very funny in places. But what I really like is the fact that John Landis knows when to switch the humour off. There are certain key scenes in the movie that are dark and terrifying, in which the humour is completely removed. The The two guys at the start of the movie, when they get lost on the moors at night time and they're being hunted by this wolf and one of them gets torn to shreds. Incredibly tense scene, one of the best opening scenes to a horror movie of all time. It's absolutely ferociously brutal and unnerving, and the humour is almost completely dropped for that whole scene. And then you got other scenes later in the movie, like the businessman who gets chased through the tube stations in London by a werewolf. Incredibly tense scene with no humour. Fantastic. So yeah, I mean, it's the film dips back and forth between humour and very, very powerful horror scenes. In fact, I think if all of the humour were taken out of An American Werewolf in London, I think the film would possibly be too disturbing, because it is a very, very tragic film. It's incredibly gory, and in a good way. The special effects are excellent. It's such a dark tragedy that to film it without humour might have really put audiences off. And so the humour is used to balance it out in that respect. So that works really well. There's some good psychological themes mixed in there as well about guilt. I mean, the lead character, there's an ongoing thing in the film which is kind of talked about a little bit, but is mostly just done subtly, where there's the possibility that he isn't a werewolf, but that he just feels guilty because when his friend was attacked, he ran away and didn't protect his friend and they let him die. So that's the sort of thing that's hanging in, like the lead character feels like he deserves the same fate. And so you can look at the whole movie on that respect. Is this all just the psychological playing out of his own guilt, and him ending up sort of committing suicide in a way out of guilt? You know, it's tons to say about that film. So I've got the video on here about the special effects transformation sequence, but I've also got a study on my website that's about 45 minutes long, which is a downloadable study of An American Werewolf in London. So you can go and order that one and watch it and find out how great the movie is. Okay, so that was number 8 on the list. Number 7 is Silence of the Lambs, so another serial killer psycho movie. I was sort of umming and ahhing about, is Silence of the Lambs a horror or a thriller? I think there are arguments that can be made that it's a horror film. For one thing, the cells in which Hannibal Lecter is held at the start of the movie, they're basically like a dungeon, dark dungeon. And what kind of hospital has dark cells like that, where it's all just brick walls that looks like something out of a castle dungeon? It's a great little visual aspect of the movie there that's unrealistic, but it affects us subconsciously and gives us that feeling that we're watching something that's medieval and almost supernatural. And Hannibal Lecter himself is certainly a movie monster in the respect that he has a evil intellect that is just off the fucking scale. I mean, he's so intelligent, it's scary. I've never heard of anybody in real life being as intelligent as the Hannibal Lecter character is. And that escape that he does from the prison later in the movie is total genius stroke. So yeah, Silence of the Lambs is superb. It's all about the monsters of the mind and so on. And the film sort of teases us. Thomas Harris, who wrote the novel, he likes to tease his audience about the fact that, hey, these serial killer psychopaths and these crazies, the very motives that drive them, those motives are inside you as well. They're inside us all. It's not a case of there's the monster and we are the good people. No, the monster is within us all. And, Thomas Harris is very good at conveying that kind of thing through entertainment. So yeah, Silence of the Lambs at number 7. Number 6 is, and this is the only modern horror movie on my list, is Hereditary from 2018. Hereditary is fantastic. I've been making some videos on it lately about how subtle it is. I've done some scene analysis videos which are available on my site, and I've also done a video called Psychological Trickery in Hereditary, which is here on YouTube. You can watch that. I think Hereditary is going to be talked about for a very long time. So much depth to that movie. There's so much good material in it. I could easily make at least another 2 or 3 videos just about that movie. It's got the psychological stuff about family and how family members can be our own enemies, how psychological abuse occurs within families. There's tons and tons of subliminal stuff in Hereditary, and one of my favourite aspects of it is that writer-director Ari Aster has actually created a very complex, long backstory on which the film is based. The film consistently makes little references back to this big, long, complex backstory. If you're paying enough attention, you can gradually figure out what's been going on for that family over the years. And I've heard some people say that they found the ending confusing, but the ending, I find, makes a hell of a lot of sense. The entire structure of the ending and all of its details makes perfect sense in terms of the motives of the demon. I won't really say anything more about that right now, but anyone who thinks the ending is just a bunch of cliches thrown together, no. The ending is very intricately worked out, and everything in the movie is building up to that ending. That's all I'll say about that for now. So yeah, Hereditary is number 6 on my list. Number 5, Nightmare on Elm Street, the original. Fantastic. Just scary as hell. I saw it when I was 12 years old. Scared the hell out of me. I couldn't even watch the whole film. I had to turn it off halfway through, and I didn't have the guts to watch the rest of the film until I was about 17 or 18 years old. Still to this day, Nightmare on Elm Street is one of the movies that I will not watch alone at night before going to bed, because I just know it'll give me nightmares. It's the confusion between dreams and reality was a fantastic genius stroke from writer-director, what the hell was his name, Wes Craven. Easily his best movie. But it's not just about the confusion of dreams and reality. I mean, the movie handles that really well anyway. But, the whole thing about Freddy Krueger being there's this subliminally communicated thing that he basically represents a paedophile, not just a child killer, but a paedophile. And that's really played down, and it's left subtle, but it's certainly put across in some very subtle details. The soundscape of the movie is awesome and really unnerving. Some very bizarre electronica music that works incredibly well for a horror film. There's not many electronic horror scores that I like, but I would say Nightmare on Elm Street is the best electronic horror score that I've ever heard. It combines nursery rhymes with some really weird bassy drones and stuff. It's really good. Nightmare on Elm Street is so good that I was able to produce a film analysis of it that I think is 2.5 hours long, and that's available on my site as a digital download as well. I think I've got 1 or 2 videos on Nightmare on Elm Street here on YouTube on my channels as well, so check those out. Let's see, number 4 on my list is Kubrick's The Shining. Now, I know some of you would have been expecting this to be my number 1 movie on the list, because I've done a lot of film analysis videos of it. But The Shining isn't my favourite movie of all time. It's not even my favourite horror. But because The Shining has been talked about so much by so many people, I think people who watch my videos assume that it must be my favourite horror film or even my favourite film of all time. But that's not the case. There have actually been quite a few other movies that I've studied just as much as The Shining. There is plenty of depth to the movie, and I have certainly done plenty of analysis videos on it. Some of those you can watch here on YouTube. I'll just show them on screen there. If you're not familiar with my studies of The Shining, go and check out these videos. The Shining, what makes it so good? Well, aside from all of the hidden message stuff that's in it, I'm not really going to talk about that now, but as a basic horror film, it works very well because the soundscape is brilliant. Some really weird music and sound effects in there. Lots of echoes to give the impression of a vast open space that the characters are lost in. The set designs are very unusual. Kubrick moved away from the traditional dark sets with cobwebs and creaky doors. He moved away from that, and he went for a beautiful hotel design that is overwhelming in terms of its giant scale. And also, as I mentioned earlier on in this video, there's the aspect of the film that the Overlook Hotel doesn't make sense. So Kubrick took some of the traditional tropes of horror and reworked them in a much more subtle and effective form. A lot of horror movies, supernatural horror, have instances of furniture moving around by themselves. Well, Kubrick doesn't do that. Instead, he has furniture and props move between shots. You don't actually see them move, but from one shot to the next, oh, that prop is there and then it's gone. That piece of furniture is there and then it's gone. And, some people try to argue that that's a just continuity accidents, but it happens so much in the movie. And also the fact that it's been admitted by the executive producer of the film that the set designs of the movie were deliberately made to be mismatching and impossible, to confuse and disorientate the viewer and make them feel like they were lost in a maze that was always changing. So you got these oversized sets which do not fit into the Overlook Hotel when you see it from outside. These are fantastic aspects to The Shining that I don't believe had been done in a movie, in a horror movie before. He really studied all the traditional aspects of horror and found ways to reinvent them. The film is very, very slow, but it's beautifully shot. There's some fantastic acting moments from Jack Nicholson. There's a lot of weird humour thrown in there, and some people don't like the humour aspect of it. But like with An American Werewolf in London, the humour aspects are dropped at key moments in the movie to give a greater sense of terror. So some of these scenes, like the hag in the bathtub and the two twins with the tricycle, these are legendary scenes that have scared the hell out of a lot of people. Okay, and at number 3 is Poltergeist. Now, I know some people are going to be like, how the hell could you boost Poltergeist above The Exorcist and The Shining? Why is it so high on the list? Yeah, it's a good horror movie, but it's not that good. I can imagine a lot of people are going to be responding like that. I think Poltergeist is absolutely superb. I mean, I'm in the middle of doing a study of Poltergeist at the moment anyway, and there's so much in that movie that this video I'm working on it's probably going to be 2 hours long, much like with my Nightmare on Elm Street analysis. Poltergeist has got so much good stuff to offer. It's good in every department. The script is fantastic. It's got some, unusual things like the supernatural is conveyed through electronics. The film sort of explores various invisible forces on our world, such as electricity, such as television signals, things that we don't see but which affect us anyway. And it uses that as the basis to persuade us that the supernatural is real. It's a gimmick, but it works really, really well. The cast and their performances in Poltergeist are outstanding. The whole cast are really, really good. Particularly, I can't remember the actress's name, but she's one of my favourite actresses on account of her role. The girl who plays the mother in this film, she gives an absolutely stellar performance. She's very convincing. The portrayal of the family itself is convincing. They haven't got traditional good-looking kids. I mean, the young boy in the story is very geeky looking. And a lot of the everyday normalities of family life are conveyed very well in Poltergeist to give that sense of reality. Much like I was saying with Rosemary's Baby, where a sense of reality is created first and then the supernatural is gradually introduced. Poltergeist does that as well. Shows us a very convincing depiction of typical suburban American family, middle class, and all the little intricacies of their lives and how they relate to each other and how dependent they are on each other as well, and then introduces the supernatural stuff. Special effects are pretty incredible throughout most of the movie. Fantastic use of strobe lighting. In terms of pure body horror, the scene where one of the psychic investigators pulls off his face in a mirror or hallucinates doing that is one of the greatest shocker moments I've ever seen in a movie. That is just brilliant. So, plenty more I could say about Poltergeist, but I'm going to save it for this full film analysis that I'm doing. So Poltergeist is number 3 on my list. But also remember, I was saying that my criteria for this list is the movies that I would want to have in my collection if I was only allowed to have 25 horror movies. And I find Poltergeist to be one of the most well-paced, most well-edited, most entertaining horror movies of all time. It may not be the most intelligent, it may not be the most original, but I find it certainly one of the most entertaining. So that's why it's number 3. Number 2 on my list is Alien. you know, but it's science fiction. Yeah, well, it's science fiction, but essentially it's a horror movie. It's got a lot of body horror stuff in it. It's a lot of weird sexual undertones. Um, the visual style of the movie is horror. It's got dark corridors and smoke and stuff. Everything about the movie is about conveying fear. It's not necessarily a science fiction piece. It's got science fiction elements, but the priority of the film is fear. One of the reasons that Alien makes number 2 on my list, and it's an aspect of the film that I don't hear talked about very much. Everyone talks about the special effects and the plot, and the nature of the alien, and so on. And so, some people talk about the weird sexual undertones and the birth trauma psychology of the film. But the way that human fear is depicted in Alien is fantastic. Look at the acting performances. Just watch the movie in terms of how characters and their sense of fear is depicted. It's way better than almost any other movie out there in that respect. Characters act like scared rabbits. They cower in corners, they shake, they sweat, they breathe intensely. You get that with the characters, and it's very convincing. A lot of horror movies, they just go for the traditional attempts to portray fear by showing, a woman will do a traditional a big scream, and it's like the high pitched scream is like so. Yeah, we've seen that tons of times before. But Alien really, really goes out of its way to depict human states of fear in a convincing way. I could probably do a whole video just on that subject. So watch the film on that level. It's an aspect that is so easy to overlook. Okay, and finally, number 1 on my list. I think quite a few of you probably would have guessed this coming, is John Carpenter's The Thing. Wow. Perfect movie. I can't really fault it. Maybe there's 1 or 2 special effects shots that could have been done slightly better, but oh my God, the other special effects shots are just legendary superbness. It's body horror. Nothing else comes close to The Thing in terms of body horror. But great deep psychological horror in terms of paranoia. The setting of the film with the ice cold winter setting, that helps to convey the sense of isolation, the fact that most of it's set at night, and the coldness also conveys the sense of all the characters being emotionally cold, separate from each other, paranoid, not trusting each other. Fantastic acting from all the actors. Every character is very carefully thought out and holds their own within the narrative. The pace of the film is bang on. The sound design is superb. That's an aspect of the film that doesn't get talked about very much. Pay attention to some of the scenes with monster transformations and just close your eyes and listen to the sound. It's very easy to get lost in the amazing visuals, but if you close your eyes to that stuff and just listen to the sound, there are some superb sound effects in there. So The Thing. I've done plenty of film analysis videos on The Thing as well. Some of them are here on YouTube. I'll just show 1 or 2 on screen. You can go and watch those. And there are other ones on my site that are available as digital downloads. Okay, so there you have it. My top 25 horror films of all time, with John Carpenter's The Thing in the number 1 spot. Firmly in the number 1 spot. That was... when I was putting together the list, right off the bat, The Thing, there wasn't any, some of the other films that made it into the top 10, I was arguing with myself about what order the film should be in, what ranking they should be in compared to each other. 1 minute The Exorcist was number 3, then it was number 7, then it was number 12, then it was number 10. Same went for a lot of the other movies, but right from the moment I sat down to write my list, The Thing was immediately at number 1, and I had no question that it was the best. Okay, so that's it. My top 25 horror movies of all time. Normally I just do film analysis videos where I take individual movies and do deep studies of them. I don't normally do ranked favourites like this. But if you like this video and you want me to do similar top 20 rankings of other genres, then give a like and share the video. If this video gets a hell of a lot of views and good feedback, then maybe I'll do some more videos like it on other genres. Okay, check out my website, collativelearning.com, if you want more articles and videos on film analysis and psychology and other things. And make sure to check out all of my other videos on my channels here on YouTube. You've been listening to Rob Ager. Bye for now.